It's really great to be back at ASU and to see a lot of old friends and to meet some new people. Thank you all for coming out on what I know is a busy time of the semester to hear me talk about the work that we're doing in my lab, in this case on sleep. Now, as humans, we often ponder the real pleasures of life, right? Food, family, travel, exercise, all of these different things. I would argue that sleep should be among the top 10 list of those pleasures, right? There's nothing better than getting into bed and going to sleep when you're really exhausted at the end of a day. And of course, we can see this in really extreme examples of people like Peter Tripp, a DJ who held for a short period of time the world record in going without sleep, an extreme case of sleep deprivation. In a wake-a-thon, a fundraiser that he held, and a publicity stunt that he held back in the 50s. You know, we all know what it's like to go without sleep for a night. It's very painful. It's not a pleasant experience. Peter actually went for over 8 days without sleep, okay? And was said to never be quite the same afterwards, by the way. Now, this is extreme. In a less extreme case, I would bet that almost everyone in the room has the same weekly pattern that I have, which is I get too little sleep Sunday through Thursday, and then finally catch up on sleep on the weekend. And if I don't get that catch-up sleep, it's bad news for the next week, right? Almost all of us are in that kind of a rhythm. And so sleep is a strange thing. It's something that we love and we enjoy. It's as enjoyable in many respects as the other things in our lives, yet we try to do without it, right? We try to get rid of it. It's always something we can put off. You know, how many times do we hear people say, I wish I could function on less sleep, or how many times do we say that, right? And so this is, you know, sort of an unusual situation. And what I want to show you today through the work in my lab, something we've only discovered in the last year, is that evolution has actually been hard at work at reducing our sleep time, probably for millions of years. So it's not just something that's going on in the modern world. It's probably something that's been going on for a long time through natural selection. And in fact, evolution has long played a role in thinking about sleep. This is a quote, a nice quote from a famous sleep biologist now over 40 years ago. He said, if sleep does not serve an absolute vital function, then it's the biggest mistake the evolutionary process ever made. Now, you could look at this in a lot of different ways. One way I often think about it is that an animal that's sleeping is not doing the kinds of things we think are important for reproductive success, right? A sleeping animal is not searching for food or searching for mates or caring for offspring or watching out for predators. Right? So there are very major opportunity costs associated with sleep, and there are also major risks associated with sleep. And as you can imagine, those opportunity costs and risks can operate with natural selection to shape the kinds of sleeping patterns we see across the tree of life. Now, I'd say as well that investigating this mystery, and many people within sleep biology would agree with this, investigating this mystery is important for human health for a variety of different reasons, right? So one aspect of this in terms of human health is that we know that sleep is intimately linked to almost every aspect of human physiology and health, mental health as well, right? 50 to 70 million people in the US have a sleep disorder at one time or another that significantly impairs their function. Of course, all of us have periodic issues with our sleep. And as well, around the world, people are shifting in their sleep patterns to more of a pattern of the Western world, and with the lighting and the lifestyles that we have. And so I think it's very important to understand what is natural human sleep and how are we changing it and what are the consequences of that. Now, to get started, we have to have a little bit of background. What is sleep? Of course, we need some operational definitions, okay? It's a reversible state of rest. It involves reduced awareness to surroundings, right, and responsiveness to surroundings. There are characteristic sleep postures, okay, that we see. I didn't add it to this list, but sleeping animals are also very cute, okay? I have some cute pictures for you. A very important issue is there's a rebound effect This is usually involved in many operational definitions of sleep. So if you deprive a person of sleep, so if Randy and I go out all night tonight partying and I deprive him of sleep for a night, he would have to sleep more the next night, right? As would I. You have to make up for some lost sleep. You don't have to make up for all of it to catch up, but you do have to make up for part of it. What is sleep? Sleep is not one thing, it's two things. Just to remind you, we have rapid eye movement sleep when most, sorry, I don't know why that did that. When we have rapid eye movement sleep, I'm not sure why it's beeping like that. We have rapid eye movement sleep when most visual dreaming occurs, okay? And then there's non-rapid eye movement sleep. And we cycle in between these throughout the night. Here's a graph of a normal night's sleep, okay, the ideal sleep according to the sleep medicine world. You go to bed at, let's say, 10 o'clock. Is there a way to turn down the volume? I don't know why this is beeping when I do that. I turned it off. Okay. So you go to sleep at, let's say, 11 o'clock at night. You wake up 8 hours later at 7. And you fall into first non-REM sleep, okay? And you go into the deeper stages of non-REM. And then you actually arouse out of non-REM and go into REM. It's a totally separate stage. It's not just a deeper stage of non-REM sleep. And then you cycle through that throughout the night. Many people actually arouse, are awake throughout the night in between these different stages. Okay, so really the questions for today is how normal is this really in our evolutionary past? Okay, and how does human sleep differ from the sleep that we see in other primates? And then finally, how does evolution inform our understanding of healthy sleep? So here's an outline. I'm going to start very broad. I'm going to talk about some of the work that's been done in my lab over the last decade or so looking at the evolution of sleep across mammals. Okay? What are the factors that influence, especially sleep durations? We're just going to focus on sleep durations. Then we'll narrow down, and I'll talk about sleep in the great apes. And again, we're doing some research on this in my lab and making some new discoveries. And then finally, we're going to drill down onto the human lineage and think about sleep in humans. So if we look across species of mammals, we see incredible variation in sleep durations. Okay, so this is the total duration of sleep per night. We see that some animals are really very short sleepers, right, like the giraffe. Okay, and if you slept like that, you might also, this is a giraffe in REM sleep, you might not sleep for very long. And then we have super long sleepers, animals that sleep for a long time. And I'll say that primates in general are sort of average sleepers. Okay, we're sleep in the 10, 12, 14-hour range. Okay. We've, over the years, built a database, which we call the Phylogeny of Sleep database. And this database is the basis for a lot of our comparative studies. Okay, so we go to the literature and we find studies of sleep, and you would be amazed at the number of studies that are out there, just out of curiosity in many cases. By sleep biologists who will go to such and such zoo and study sleep in one animal or another. And so we actually have data on 127 different mammals in this database, okay? And an average of 9 individuals per species. A lot of the studies are EEG. They use electroencephalograph data to look at the total sleep duration as well as non-REM and REM sleep, okay, the sleep durations of non-REM and REM. And also collect data on cycle length and experimental conditions that are used. And so this is about sleep architecture, the distribution of REM and non-REM throughout usually a 24-hour period. Okay. Now, there are a variety of different hypotheses for variation in sleep durations, and sleep biologists have investigated these questions for quite a while. One of the first things we did in our work was just organize these ideas into different categories. And we quickly realized there are some hypotheses that focus more on the ecological constraints on sleep. How much time does an animal have available for sleep? And then there are other hypotheses that focus on the benefits of sleep. For example, sleep is usually thought to be for the brain and perhaps involved, and it's known to be involved in humans, in memory consolidation, right? So brain size and other aspects like that have long been thought to explain variation in sleep, or proposed to explain variation in sleep. Now, we came at this as well with phylogenetic comparative methods, which was an innovation. Those had not been used at the time, and we continue to use those methods in this work. Now, this just lists some of the major hypotheses we've investigated, and I don't want to go through them in great depth, but just to point out that we have some that are involving ecological constraints like predation risk, right? If an animal doesn't have a safe place to sleep and it experiences high predation, we might expect it to not spend very much time asleep, okay? Or foraging constraints. If an animal has high metabolic needs or its resources it has small patches and it has to spend more time foraging, right? We proposed it would spend less time sleeping, has to devote more time to foraging, okay? Versus functional benefits of sleep involving memory consolidation or activation or investment in the immune system, or energy conservation, sleeping to conserve energy. Okay? So there are these different categories of hypotheses. I'll just walk you through some of our results in this regard. Here are some results involving foraging constraints, so one of the ecological hypotheses. And this is showing independent contrast, phylogenetically independent contrast, in which evolutionary increases in basal metabolic rate, okay, across mammals, are associated with a decline in both non-REM sleep and in REM sleep, okay? And of course, total sleep as well. Or predation risk, using a measure of exposure at the sleep site, exposure to predation at the sleep site. We again find negative associations. Evolutionary increases in predation at the sleep site are associated with less sleep, okay? Evolutionary declines in the amount of sleep. Or trophic level, right? If we look at trophic level, carnivores sleep more than prey animals, okay? So very good support in our studies and in other recent phylogenetic comparative studies for ecological constraints. Unfortunately, the functional benefits have not received that kind of consistent support, okay, in general. So for example, with brain size, our studies revealed no significant association between sleep durations and relative brain size. We also found in some other studies, one that we published in PLOS One, no significant association between sleep duration and hippocampus volume, the site of especially spatial memories. Okay. We found some indications that amygdala volume in non-REM sleep showed positive correlations. But you can see this isn't a very strong association. There's quite a bit of variation around that line. And we actually expected this to show up with REM more than non-REM. So it wasn't really what we expected. So in general, based on a large number of studies that we've done, my collaborators, especially Rob Barton, Isabella Cappellini, and others, we've really concluded that there's better evidence for these ecological constraints on sleep durations than the functional benefits in explaining sleep. Okay, and this is relevant for what I want to talk about moving forward with the apes. Now, okay, so that's just showing where we found support, especially for the ecological constraints, a little bit of support as well here for immune system parameters. Now, with this in hand, we wanted to explore that a little bit more. Okay, so ecology influences sleep. Let's explore that some more. And so we developed some theoretical models, agent-based models that are spatially explicit, that really involve evolutionary computation or genetic algorithms. This is work that a former postdoc of mine, Alberto Cerbi, led. And so we have, and I'll just walk you through this quickly to show you how this works. We have various kinds of selective pressures we can impose on an agent, shown here, okay? And this agent has a spatial arena that it operates in where there are food patches or sleep patches, okay? And we can change the distribution, whether these food patches and sleep patches are interdigitated or whether they're separated, okay? And we can also change the patch depletion rate for the food patches. And this agent has a behavior that's determined entirely by this chromosome, you would call it, that has 24 different genes that tell the agent what to do in each hour of the day. Okay? Now we start off with a totally random genome and about 100 of these agents, and they all play this game. They all have a separate genome, and they all play this game where they move around and try to build up energy, both a combination of food energy and sleep energy. I thought I'd show you how this works very quickly. Here's some visual output from the model. See if I can make that a little bigger. And what you see is a situation where the food and sleep patches are separated. And we have an agent, this is at the very beginning of the simulation, okay, that's moving around and not doing a particularly good job of finding, right now it should be finding a sleep patch. Now it can behave flexibly, that's what this blue indicates. Now it's next going to go back to finding sleep patches, so it's hanging around here trying to find these sleep patches. Now what happens is we have, as I said, about 100 of these agents, and we say after a round of simulation, which are the 10 agents that perform best in this task? Those agents then populate the next generation of the model. Okay, so we take their genomes with some mutation rate, and we have now another population of 100 individuals. So this is natural selection going on in the computer, right? In the computer itself. And so we have, at a later time, I'll show you what, for this same simulation, we have now, this is only 11 generations later, okay? We have agents who have consolidated their effort into the food category, okay, and consolidated their effort into finding sleep sites, right? So natural selection has settled on this solution, okay, in the computer for this particular ecological challenge. And so this provides a way for us to explore the ecology of sleep, the ecological factors that influence sleep. So we start with a totally random genome for each of 100 different agents. We apply different kinds of selective pressure, whether it's predation, patch depletion rate, the distribution of those resources, okay? And then we find later, we look later at how that's changed the behavior of these agents, okay? So here's a case where the selective pressure led to 2 bouts of sleep and 2 bouts of foraging. Okay. So the output then we can look at is duration of sleep or number of sleep bouts, 2 in this case, timing of sleep in relation to predators, etc. Okay. And so just to give you a sense of some of the output from this, this is looking at how patch depletion and resource distribution affects sleep duration. Okay. And you can see here's patch duration, the minutes until depletion. And as you would expect, if the patch doesn't last long, right, animals spend less time sleeping, right? They have to devote more time to foraging. And so we can really look at the interplay among different needs of these agents, right, in the computer. Now, to quickly summarize what I've told you in this part of my talk, mammalian sleep architecture is primarily explained by ecological benefits, okay? Less so by the functional benefits of sleep. An evolutionary model, as I just showed you, really supports this role of ecology in shaping the different aspects of sleep architecture, okay? And I've just told you one example out of the many different types of selective environments we've imposed on these agents. And a really important thing, though, is that the functional benefits of sleep may still be very important. I mean, there are no animals in nature that are known that have completely given up sleep. Animals devise a lot of clever ways to sleep. So there must be some functional benefits to sleep. And one of the things that we've proposed based on our work is that animals may adjust the intensity of sleep, how effectively they're acquiring those benefits in the limited amount of time that they have to get those benefits. Okay? So within the ecological constraints, animals may adjust the intensity of sleep. Okay, so this is now a good point to transition to talk about sleep in great apes. And One of the questions I often pose to my students, maybe I'll pose it to this group to see if anyone knows the answer. I bet you somebody will, though. Nope, my students have never been able to answer this. What is the one behavioral trait that unites the great apes? The behavioral trait that unites, in a phylogenetic sense, shared by the great apes but no other of the primates? Anybody know the answer to this?
Nesting.
Nesting, yeah, I knew somebody. I figured it was going to be you or Ian, but that's right. We build, all great apes, for those of you who don't know it, build a nest, and they do it every night. The lesser apes do not. They sleep on a branch, like the monkeys do. But we build a platform and lie down and comfortably sleep. And one factor that's probably going to play a role here, or probably does play a role here, is body mass. And we looked at this in a recent paper, looking at the distribution in relation to body mass, animals that use a fixed point nest, okay, like these mouse lemurs. So that means they use some existing structure in the environment in which to sleep, okay, in this case during the day. Tree branches, okay, like this monkey, okay, where they sleep in one way or another. I mean, it amazes me, how they find a place to sleep in this arboreal environment. And then the great apes. And you can imagine, if you're larger in body mass, this is going to be hard to do. It would be hard for us to do, right? That's why it amazes us that they can do it. But, of course, they can, and we require a more stable platform for our sleep. And so the great apes build this nest, and each individual builds its own nest. Now, another perspective on this is that these sleeping platforms may be important for great ape cognitive ability. That in order to really get those benefits of sleep, for example, for the brain, as I was talking about previously with that hypothesis, the functional benefit for memory consolidation and other aspects of brain management and development, the way to do that would be to be able to lie flat, to really lie down and sleep deeply and acquire those benefits more efficiently. And the postdoc in my lab, David Sampson, who I really should say has inspired a lot of what I'm talking about in this section and the next section, he's really brought some interesting new ideas to my lab, and it's been a great collaboration. David's investigated this question in great apes and in monkeys. This is work he did before he joined my lab. He studied orangutans. This is at the Indianapolis Zoo. He studied orangutans and he studied baboons. And this is an interesting shot where you can see both of the animals. You can see the baboon, how it sleeps, basically huddled, sitting up, right? And the orangutan. And this just amazes me. I mean, what they do is they give the animal straw. In this case, he distributes the straw. He takes this blanket, folds the blanket in ways that he wants, and then lies down. And look at how he's lying, flat on the back. I mean, when I look at this, I think this looks like economy class seating here at the back of the plane and first class seating up at the front, right? I mean, great apes have first class sleep is the point. And he showed that that's the case. He showed that this really does affect their sleep. So for example, sleep fragmentation, this is the number of times awake of a 2-minute duration of awakeness in a 1-hour period, is significantly lower for the orangutan than the baboon. They sleep better, okay? They have less motor activity as well. Now, David did something really clever. He thought, I wonder if I could actually change how well these orangutans sleep and then test how that affects their cognition. And so he, instead of just giving them a blanket, instead of just giving him a blanket, which I think is score number 1, he would also give them foam pads and pillows and all sorts of other things, okay? So 0 is straw, and I believe 1 is blanket, and number of blankets might increase the score. But he had a score that he could give to how much material the animal had to build a nest. And he showed that sleep fragmentation declines as animals have more comfortable sleep sites, okay? He also then worked with others to give these animals a grammar task, basically understanding the order of events, of things that they see on a touch screen. And he showed that they improved in their accuracy on this testing after nights with more higher quality sleeping materials with his sleep comfort index. So it looks like it pays off. We sleep better, and when we sleep better, by having this opportunity to lie in a comfortable bed, and when we have that opportunity, our cognition is improved. Okay, and I'm speaking for great apes in general here. Now, we've realized that we need to understand more about what happens outside of the great apes and whether they experience these same benefits from better or worse sleep. And so we're actually studying this in the lemurs, and we have grants in to study this across different species of primates, including hopefully gibbons and various species of monkeys. And what we're doing, we're actually doing this the opposite way for a bunch of poor lemurs at the Duke Lemur Center. We're restricting their sleep. We're depriving them of sleep and then testing how that affects their next day cognition. So we keep them up all night, playing various stimuli every 5 minutes, okay, to these animals. We have very groggy, sleepy animals the next day. And then we give them various tasks. I should say Joel Bray has been a part of this as well and really helping us. Joel was in my lab at Duke beforehand and really helped develop a lot of these tests. And so we're implementing a lot of the work that Joel did in planning this. And so this is, for example, a foraging task where food is dropped onto this board where these rocks are glued in, and we test how long it takes a sleep-deprived versus a non-sleep-deprived animal to find preferred food, okay, in this task, or inhibition tasks. We're also measuring if they're more grumpy, if there's more, agonistic interaction, I should say more formally, after nights of sleep deprivation and other things like that. Okay, because ultimately, if we're going to understand this, we can't just keep studying apes. We need to expand this scale and see if it really is something about apes where there's this strong link between sleep and cognition, or if it's really characteristic of all primates. Okay. All right, so let's move now to sleep in humans. Here's a human sleeping. Hadza man out away from camp on a hunt. You can see a few differences right away with the great apes, the other great apes. Of course, there's a fire here, which the other great apes do not have as part of their sleeping routine. There is a bed, okay, as you can see, it's very similar. But of course, they're on the ground, okay? Humans sleep on the ground. Very few great apes, there are very few reports of great apes sleeping on the ground. Usually it's the males, larger bodied, who are sleeping on the ground, perhaps in areas of lower predation or other circumstances. So this is characteristic of humans, sleeping on the ground. Now, we can think about these differences in that kind of qualitative way, sleeping on the ground, having fire, things like that. But I really want to think about this in a more quantitative way in terms of our sleep architecture. And for that, I need to have a bit of a digression here to talk about some methods we've developed in our lab to understand whether a species is exceptional in some trait, or whether it's what you would expect, based on what we know in other species. And this is a new method that we've developed and are applying to a lot of different questions, okay? And then I'll come to describe the ways that humans really are exceptional. So sometime back, I wrote a book, I published it in 2011, called The Comparative Approach in Evolutionary Anthropology and Biology. And this is the table of contents. And this is roughly what I submitted to the journal. It's published by University of Chicago. And work was going really well on this book. I was making progress, getting through the chapters. But there was this one chapter that I had nothing written on, very late in the game, too. It was investigating evolutionary singularities. I mean, this is a book that was written for evolutionary anthropologists, and I knew I had to say something about human evolution. And for a lot of comparative biologists, you can't do this. You can't study an N of 1. How do you study a single lineage on a tree? It's hard to do in a comparative context, right? In the context of comparative biology and phylogenetics. And so, I was thinking about how to do this, and one weekend, finally, I was thinking, well, I could just cut it out. That's an easy solution. But then I forget who it was. It might have been Sandy Harcourt. He said, well, then you'd have 13 chapters, and that would be bad luck. And so I was like, well, okay. So I stuck with it. And then one day, my family went out of town for a long weekend. I thought, okay, this is the weekend. I'm going to figure out how to do this. And so I did the proper thing. I walked down to the local pub, and there was a football game on and had good Wi-Fi connection. And I opened up my computer, and I started doing more searching and looking around in the biological literature, and I found a whole lot of papers that were highly relevant to this. None within biological anthropology. Papers I was embarrassed to not know about, actually. I mean, by Mark McPeak on testing hypotheses about evolutionary change on a single branch of a phylogeny. Liam Revell, who was at Harvard with me at the time, had written a paper about this. Others where it wasn't quite so obvious, but I realized, wow, and people who had applied these methods to particular questions, I realized, wow, evolutionary anthropology needs to know about this. You know, we need to really develop this within our field, this set of methods. And so I went to the NSF and was successful in getting funding. And we're now in the second year of an NSF grant to develop these methods, test them, apply them to various questions within evolutionary anthropology. I will say I'm not too happy with that chapter 12 or whatever it is in my book, because my thinking has come so far since then. Okay, it's not because I wrote it in a pub, it's because my thinking has improved. And I want to just give you a little bit of terminology here and then very briefly sketch out the method and then show you how it works in the case of sleep. So I want to first define an evolutionary singularity. This is a trait that evolved only one time in the clade of interest. Okay, so some group of organisms, you have a trait that evolved. So this could occur on an internal branch of the tree, and it leads to its representation in all species in a subclade, right? So it's in multiple species, it's a synapomorphy. Or the trait can appear in a single taxon on the tree, and the evolutionary event likely occurred on the terminal branch leading to that taxon, okay, an autapomorphy. In cladistic terms, an autapomorphy. So this idea is appropriate for discrete traits, right, like use of a sleeping platform that we see in the great apes, right, a synapomorphy, or terrestrial sleep, something that occurred on the branch leading to humans. Now, as I said, I want to focus on something different, a little bit more quantitative, which I'll call an evolutionary outlier. Something that's unexpected. It's more extreme than you would predict based on some kind of a statistical model of trait correlations and phylogeny. Okay? And so it's very important in this case to incorporate phylogeny because close relatives are likely to have more similar residual values. You know, so think about this multivariate space with some traits, right? If you're looking at an ape, all the apes might be above that line, or the lemurs might be below that line. You need to incorporate phylogeny, where you're looking on the tree and making this kind of a prediction, okay? So evolutionary singularities involve discrete characters, okay, like use of a sleeping platform, that's yes, no, and evolutionary outliers refer to quantitative traits like brain size, body mass, or sleep duration, or percent REM sleep, or other things like that. So here's how it works. The method, well, we have several different methods we're using in the context of the grant I talked about. One of them is called Phylogenetic Prediction. It's the only one I'm going to talk about today. It uses a statistical model in phylogeny to predict values in a species, and then you see if that species actually differs from what you would predict. Okay? So we have some kind of a statistical model. We incorporate phylogeny in the error term of this model, right? And so we have a bunch of different predictor variables that influence some response variable. Okay? Now, I won't get into the details of this. It's implemented with a Bayesian MCMC approach, Markov chain Monte Carlo, which returns a distribution of parameters, not a single point estimate. But because of that, you actually can get a distribution of predictions. Okay? And so we don't end up with a point estimate. We end up with a distribution of predictions, and we can ask where do humans fall relative to that. Okay? So here's how it works. We have some kind of a regression model here. We have a response variable. We have predictor variables. Okay? We have a target species. Think of this as humans. Okay? So the first step is we estimate the parameters of this model using all of the species except for the target species. Right? And again, we have predictors for the target, and we have a response for the target. We then can use those parameters that we estimated here and the data on x's and the y and the x's here to predict what y should be, what the response variable should be in this species. Okay? We can then compare the observed value to what was actually predicted. Okay? So we might have a situation like this where we predict here's our posterior probability distribution of predictions, okay? And the actual value is here. It's observed to be here. So this target species would be a positive outlier. Or the target species could be a negative outlier, right? Or, of course, the target species could be within that distribution. And we would say, yeah, this species is about what you would predict, given what we know about the trait in this group of species. Okay, so with that in mind, let's see if human sleep is exceptional. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that the two main findings we have is that humans sleep less than predicted, and we spend a greater proportion of time in REM sleep. And I want to propose as well that we're more flexible in our sleep. And here's where the support isn't as quantitative. Okay, but let's go over the first two first. First of all, this just blows me away looking at the distribution of sleep times across primates. Humans are the shortest sleeping of all of the primates, as you can see here. And so the question is there something about our brain size, life history, or something else that would lead us to have a short duration of sleep? And so we build this statistical model that I talked about, predicting sleep duration. And here's the predicted distribution for humans. Okay, so it predicts that humans should sleep about 10 hours a night, okay, based on this. And you can see that we're well outside that distribution. Okay, and this is just the raw data across species shown in a different way as a histogram. Okay, so based on these different traits, the relationship between these traits and sleep duration, and also our phylogenetic position, we're very short sleepers. Okay, here's percentage of REM. Again, we have the highest percentage of REM of all the primates. Looks like there's a difference, but let's look at this quantitatively. Here's, again, the same model here, except now we're predicting the percentage of REM based on activity period, body mass, endocranial volume, folivory, interbirth interval, group size, okay, and of course phylogeny. Here's the predicted distribution, quite a wide distribution in this case. The observed value is above it. It's not just that we have a large brain or something else. We're really outside what you would predict, okay, in the raw data across species. This is achieved, we know from other statistical tests, through higher than expected REM and lower than expected non-REM sleep. Looks like both of those are shifting, or at least out of whack with what you would predict. Now, so why would this be? I mean, this goes back a little bit to what Kim was saying in his introduction or his mention of the other talk. I think throughout human evolution, just like today, we've had a lot better things to do than sleep. We haven't been able to get rid of sleep. That's hard to do, but natural selection has whittled it away. So we've proposed this sleep intensity hypothesis. This is David Sampson and me again, I should have said. Early humans experienced selective pressure to fulfill sleep needs in the shortest time possible, to get those benefits of sleep in the shortest time possible. Selective forces might include greater predation risk by sleeping on the ground, okay? Greater risk of intergroup conflict that might have occurred at different times of day or night. Benefits of social interaction, especially in the context of acquiring and transmitting new skills and knowledge through social learning. Okay. Now, I mentioned as well flexibility in sleep. And here I turn to a bunch of more anecdotal evidence, I would say. For example, from different ethnographies. Here's one, Daniel Everett's study of the Praha. He says, Praha take naps, 15 minutes to 2 hours at the extremes during the day and night. There's loud talking in the village all night long, very difficult to sleep. Or Carol Worthman in a review looking across ethnographic literature. Human nights are filled with activity and significance, and nowhere do people typically sleep from evening to dawn. Okay, so an idea of a very fluid kind of sleep in hunter-gatherer groups. As well, in the historical record, many of you probably know Roger Ekirch's book and his work. It was featured a lot in the press when it came out, where he looked at the historical record mainly in Europe and found many references to a first sleep and a second sleep with a period of wakefulness in between them. Okay? And he proposed that this might be a characteristic across Europe in many different cultures. Or there are also experimental studies where people have put people into situations where they have a long night and no access to electricity. For example, this study, Tom Ware, where people shifted to a biphasic sleep pattern, okay, under 10 hours of daylight, so 14-hour nights, okay, in a natural light setting. Now, other primates show nighttime activity. I'm sure there are a lot of reports that people can share about that, but we're hypothesizing that humans are more extreme in their flexibility in sleep. Now, one thing that's making me pause a little bit on all of this is there is a study that just came out, I think a very nice study, that studied sleep in 3 different hunter-gatherer groups, and they found, in fact, that sleep is pretty consolidated, very similar to human sleep in the modern world. Interestingly, in these populations, humans sleep about 6.5 hours a night, very short sleep, and not much napping, according to their calculations from the devices that the people were wearing. One thing to note, though, is there's a lot of flexibility in when people went to sleep, as they report in the paper. And sleep efficiency is slightly less than what we see in Western populations. Now, we've also been investigating this. This is, again, David Sampson. We've been going to a village in Madagascar and studying sleep there, agricultural population without access to electricity. We've actually done polysomnography in this population, as you can see here, as well as using actigraphy devices that were used in this other paper. And we're actually finding that they're incredibly flexible in their sleep. Very low sleep efficiency, a lot of sleep fragmentation, which really seems to be more in line with what the ethnographic literature is reporting. So we're not really sure where this is all standing, what leads some populations to have more flexibility versus others, but we think there's a lot of interesting work to be done there. And we're still keeping the hypothesis alive, at least, in investigating the circumstances that lead to this flexibility or fragmentation. Okay, so to move to some take-home messages, just really quickly, mammals exhibit incredible variation in sleep patterns and also adaptations for acquiring sleep. They don't give it up. They can't seem to give it up, okay? But there are a lot of variation in how animals sleep. From our work, it seems that ecology is the primary driver of variation in mammalian sleep architecture. And among primates, great apes are expert nest builders, and this seems to ensure a good night's sleep, enable a deeper sleep, so that they can acquire the functional benefits of sleep. Okay? I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done on this to see how it varies among great apes, okay? And also in comparison to the lesser apes and then to monkeys. We propose that humans are exceptional in 3 ways. Right? We sleep less than you would predict. We have a higher percentage of REM than you would predict. And we're more flexible in our sleep. Okay? And I think our findings are challenging what is normal sleep, an 8-hour bout consolidated into one night, okay, with a regular start time, a regular end time. The sleep hygiene messages pretty well, I'm sure. So considering some of the things that we're doing right now is really trying to bring more of an evolutionary perspective on human sleep and sleep disorders, including through the work I just talked about, but also in collaboration with Andrew Crystal in psychiatry at Duke Medicine. Now they've just changed to Duke Health, by the way. It's not Duke Medicine, it's Duke Health. And then Andrew Phillips, collaborator of mine at Harvard. So we're investigating how evolution might be relevant to understanding various kinds of sleep disorders. We're also very interested in the global health implications. How do sleep patterns change, for example, with greater access to artificial lighting? Could it be that the sleep fragmentation in the population we're studying is due to the high density of people, the poor housing? This obviously has a lot of relevance in a global health context because that disrupted sleep has consequences for many different health challenges. And then we're also really interested in this need that all of us have to be more flexible in our sleep. And so really trying to take a more active role in how we can achieve flexibility in our own sleep, or for people in the military, for doctors, for airline pilots, whatever it might be. And so what can we learn from evolution solutions to achieve flexible sleep. In that regard, again, the Duke Lemur Center is a key resource for us where we're studying cathemeral lemurs that are very flexible in their activity patterns and really trying to understand how they do it. And then again, using these computational models I talked about, the evolutionary algorithms, to devise various inputs that would work for humans to achieve flexible sleep. And so for that, we're seeking some big grants to really apply this perspective and even do experiments on humans. Finally, I'll say I'm just really excited about these methods that we're developing to study evolutionary uniqueness, the evolutionary outliers, to really look at single branches on the tree. I mean, an obvious case is humans, but they're not the only case where there are very interesting adaptations that are not seen throughout the tree, and we might want to understand the degree to which they're really unexpected and what factors might have led to those adaptations. And so with that, I just want to thank again, especially David Sampson for his role in bringing these ideas into the lab and doing some of the analyses I presented, but also my other collaborators, especially Rob Barton, Isabella Cappellini, Patrick McNamara, Joel Bray, the Duke Lemur Center, and the various funding sources that have supported this work. Thanks very much.
For humans, the social foraging is playing a role as a kind of additional ecological factor on influencing sleep.
Well, I mean, you could obviously try to bring that into a model. I think it would certainly reveal that it's an influence and compare it to the role of other influences. I mean, I know from my experiences in living in this village, in Madagascar where we're doing this work, I mean, it's horrible trying to sleep. And there's social interactions going on throughout the night. I think, clearly it's not just having an iPhone and a computer and a telephone or anything else. I mean, we seem to, throughout the world, my limited survey, it seems that people are seeking these out. I think it's an important role.
Yeah, so, thinking of it as either a disruption to sleep or something that people are, actively seeking out. I think those are sort of different ways of conceptualizing the role of socializing in sleep, right?
Okay, so what do you mean by that?
Well, exactly. so you could think about you're trying to sleep and you're, hearing noise,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a
because
disruption.
Other people are seeking
that's
out.
right.
Yeah.
Sure. Or that there's some internal motivation to take advantage of social opportunities that might either be immediately present or theoretically present if you were to go and expend some energy to engage in them.
It'd be interesting to investigate that further. I mean, my sense is that these are popping up, these kind of social interactions are popping up throughout the night in the village we're working in. When people hear other people up, they get up and things like that. Okay. And then, of course, everyone's disrupted as well.
Right.
That's interesting.
I was just curious, your last slide got me curious about sleep throughout the animal kingdom. Are there any animals that don't sleep at all? Or
yeah, that's always a difficult issue. And, there are a variety. That's one of the reasons why I have the opening slides, what is sleep? And, of course, most species have not been studied in terms of whether they sleep or not. And it's hard to distinguish between rest and sleep. And so that's why that sleep rebound, and of course in a lot of animals we can't we can't measure brain activity in a fruit fly or something very effectively. And so the way that people study is they disrupt the rest of an animal and see if they have to make up that rest as one way to measure sleep. And, there's some incredible examples of how animals deal with the challenge of getting sleep. There's a study on elephant seals that describes how in some dives, they become negatively buoyant as they go down, and if they fell asleep, and many of them are out at sea, for 4 or 6 months out of the year, even longer, and they become negatively buoyant as they go down. And so the question is, well, how would you, think about sleep in an elephant seal. If you fell asleep, right, you might get down too far to be able to make it back up for your next breath. And they've documented through all sorts of devices that they put on the animals how on some dives they go down, once they get through the danger zone of where the sharks are, it's about 200 meters, they go into a position where they're on their back and basically exhibiting maximum drag as they're going down. They continue to go down and they sort of drift and flutter like a leaf. And then they suddenly will stop and come straight back up. And this has been proposed as one way that they sleep. Likewise, there are animals that hibernate and arouse periodically every 7 days, every 10 days, every 30 days. And it's been shown that in some of these species, they actually arouse out. They don't wake up. They actually go into non-REM sleep. And it seems that even hibernation is creating sleep debt. So there are incredible examples like that. Whether there's a species that doesn't sleep, as far as I know, there's no evidence for it.
Yeah, quick follow-up on that, and another question. So I got interested in octopus because they have evolved intelligence independently of mammals, right? They can do observational learning, last I understood. Do you know anything about sleep in octopi? And
No.
The other question is more scientific.
Good species to study. The jellyfish have been studied. There's this one jellyfish that has there's some characteristic of its visual apparatus that's considered pretty complex, and people have argued that it sleeps, based, again, you can't get the standards that we would have for a mammal. But.
The other question is more boring, I guess, which is what proportion of the variance in sleep are explained by the phylogenetic regressions that you're doing, the models? How much are we missing?
So how much variation are we explaining just with the statistical models? Oh, that's a good question. I should know more about that. In general, for just primates, not much. It's for the overall duration of sleep, not much. For REM sleep, we get more. For total REM sleep, I don't know for sure on percentage of REM sleep. Of course, primates don't often have a lot of variation in some of the traits we're looking at also. But across mammals, we obviously see more. So, activity period's one variable that comes up. Endocranial volume's another variable that comes up. For REM, at least, endocranial volume. So, and I don't know the R squared off the top of my head, but I should. I'll look that up. The models don't actually return that, so it takes a little extra effort. That's a good question.
So your data showing the ecological factors shaping shorter sleep in some species, especially us, is very convincing. Presumably, this has pushed the benefits of sleep to a point where it might increase vulnerability to disease in organisms that are subject to shorter sleep otherwise. Any thoughts about that?
That are subject to shorter sleep otherwise.
Well, if natural selection is pushing for other reasons for shorter and shorter sleep, there might well be a cost in terms of brain biochemistry or something else that makes you vulnerable to disease.
Sure. Okay, so you're talking about any kind of disease, not just infectious disease.
Right,
okay.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Evolution, there's evidence in Western populations, right, that not sleeping enough sets you up for obesity, for metabolic syndrome, for all sorts of different health problems, cancer, but of course, as you know, evolution may not operate to optimize health, especially things that occur later in life, if there are all these benefits of not sleeping, especially if those benefits are accruing, at the peak of reproduction. So I guess that might be one response. Certainly the hunter-gatherers don't seem to be sleeping in a way, from those three populations, don't seem to be sleeping in a way that the Society for Sleep Medicine would recommend of, 6 hours, 6.5 hours a night, not going to bed at the same time every night, et cetera. So, interesting point, though.
Yeah, despite that new article,
Oh,
that's right. Despite that new article, I think there's still a lot we don't know about hunter-gatherer sleep patterns. Having spent more than 2,000 nights myself in hunter-gatherer camps, they're very different than Western sleep patterns. And trying to claim they're exactly the same, I think, is a mistake. But I wanted to
those
ask
three
you,
different populations, or,
Yeah.
or claiming they're the same to Western.
Yeah,
populations.
the big picture seemed to be that, this is really similar to Western sleep patterns. I think that's probably an oversimplification. But I wanted to ask about life history. So juveniles and infants sleep very differently than adults. Even teens seem to sleep differently than adults. And older adults seem to sleep a lot different than younger adults. And all those things seem to suggest that I understand that the ecological effects are strong predictors and the functional hypotheses don't seem to be as strong, but and I don't think that the predation pressures and opportunity for foraging and so on differs very much between 30-year-olds and 50-year-olds, and yet the sleep patterns are really different. You got any ideas?
That's true.
You got any ideas on what?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have any data to know how general that kind of a pattern is. You know, we have some data on juveniles versus adults in the database. I mean, for thinking about other species, we don't have the kind of data to really investigate that. But you're right, it's an interesting question. And what drives it? I mean, some of the data we're collecting on the lemurs at the Duke Lemur Center, you know, can get at some of those questions. I mean, it really takes a more concerted effort to look at a species and try to figure out, you know, what are the characteristics over the life course. So we found with age, right, Joel? What is it with age? Oh, that was activity at night, though. Different issue. So, yeah, but we have sleep senescence, right? I mean, our sleep quality goes down as with the rest of our body. So.
Yes. One last question I'd like to ask. Everyone be very sure you take every bit of plates and books out of the room.
Okay. What about the effects of late night snack and you know, just digestive system on sleep?
In general, the need for a snack?
Yeah, and how does it lengthen the amount of sleep needed or whatever?
I have no idea. I don't know. That's a good question. We haven't looked at that at the Lemur Center. We could.